Good evening and welcome to the New Theatre in Dublin for the second event of this year's James Connolly Festival. It takes place under different circumstances to normal, but better than last year when we had to cancel entirely. So without a live audience, we are coming to you by means of recorded events in the New Theatre in Temple Bar for the rest of the week, with a series of events that will cover issues such as feminism, the centenary of the Northern State, and more broadly the national question, workers' rights, a history of Connolly books and the communist movement in Ireland. We'll also host a spoken word and music session at the end of the week with Emma Kerwin and rapper Little Dialect, among others. The penultimate event of the week will take place on Saturday, when we have revered Marxist thinker Vijay Prashad joining us for James Connolly Memorial Lecture. And finally, as is tradition, we will hold a wreath-laying ceremony at the grave of Connolly in Arbor Hill to close the week's events off on Sunday. For those unaware, the festival takes place annually, and what we do is we attempt to bring together working class arts, culture and politics. So getting to tonight, my name is Aaron Nolan. I'm an organiser with the committee of the festival and will be chairing this meeting. This event initially included Senator Eileen Flynn as a guest, but unfortunately she fell ill prior to recording and couldn't make it. We've rescheduled the recording and tried to source a replacement from the travelling community, but again, unfortunately, she was required to cancel very close to rescheduled date. We made attempts to find a replacement really up until the last minute, but with no luck due to COVID and other reasons. Unfortunate as it is, we carry on with the three guests that we have tonight. The title of tonight's event is Building Communities Fighting Racism. We feel it's an important talk to have. We're living in a time where across the island of Ireland, public services are constantly slashed away at, where our communities are under threat through gentrification, lack of investment in our areas, and the selling off of public lands to private speculators. We live in a society where the racist institution of direct provision still exists, a time where working class people from varying backgrounds are repeatedly pitted against one another in the fight for these very services, where they be in terms of housing, health or education. A time when workers' rights are at an all-time low, where the gig economy dominates, where security of tenure is always under threat and rent rates are continually increasing. In this arena of frustration fostered by neoliberal governments made up of Fine Gael, Fianna Fáil, the Greens and the Labour Party, we also live in a period where the space has been opened up for the growth of far-right politics in this country on a scale which we have not seen probably since the 30s, with reactionary forces preying on the legitimate concerns of the people and manipulating them in pursuit of their agenda of hate and racism. However, in the face of that, we've seen pushback from progressive forces, and we will hear from people involved in that pushback and who are organising or who are involved in the issues that are affecting their community, their family and their workplaces. Our three guests tonight are Rodrigo Silva, Gloria Kensho and Councillor Kieran Perry. The format for tonight's meeting will see each guest speak for up to 10 minutes. We'll follow with some questions from the chair, but also should any of the guests have questions or points of conversation that they'd like to pick up on with one another, they're more than welcome to do so, and indeed are encouraged to do so. We'll try to keep the meeting to within an hour, but of course if we need to go longer we will. And with that, I will introduce our first speaker, who is Rodrigo of the Brazilian Left Front. Rodrigo has been living in Ireland for a number of years, and he and his organisation have been part of and have made very strong contributions towards various campaigns, including repeal, take back the city and housing, and helping in deportation issues, and also more recently around offering support to delivery drivers, many of whom come from the Brazilian community. So Rodrigo, if you want to say a few words. Thanks.
Thank you. Brazilian Left Front, we work on two fronts. First, we try to build a dialogue with the community, so it's a very important and very diverse community. And second, we get involved with local groups on what concerns local political issues and our common interests and struggles for people's liberation, I guess. The first point is very important because building a dialogue with the community is a crucial part, as a community is a very heterogeneous community. So the BLF, the group's narrative does not intend to represent all of the Brazilian people's narratives and worldviews and concerns. So, in saying that, obviously we are a left-wing group, so we have the anti-capitalist struggle at our core, and we position ourselves with the together with the community when struggles and when situations arise, like violence, xenophobic attacks, or anything like that. Problems in the workplace, problems with housing, and so we position ourselves together with the community to organize around that. For example, at the beginning of the pandemic crisis, we organized with the students, English language students, for a group called CLs, which was a acronym for COVID Ireland, English language student solidarity. So that was a very important group that we organized with other groups and individuals to get the people to organize around PPS numbers. So a lot of people arrived here just right before the lockdown. So with no PPS numbers, they had no way to find jobs or to get a living, for a living. So they had no rights for the pandemic unemployment payment. So we had to kind of organize to get those PPS numbers, and so the students organized together, helped each other, and organized and articulated with local government bodies and had those PPS numbers issued so people could get jobs and frontline jobs posts and all that. So that was to alleviate some of the material needs of the people during this crisis. We also organize round tables with the community, so that's important as well to give space for more critical discourse, a critical analysis of situations when we have problems like Brazilian politics or attacks of violence and racism, and so we can get the community together to kind of like mitigate some of the common sense narratives that arise in these situations and give space for more critical discourse and narrative. So on the second point, that is organizing with local groups, we see that it's very important as well to build a community with shared interests and to see the real enemy, it's a power of capital accumulation and neoliberal politics. But it's also important because it gives us agency as racialized migrants within those groups. So bringing our perspectives and our lived experiences to those organizations and to the campaigns and struggles that we fight here. So this has been the work we do. We organized, as you said, with Repeal the 80th. So we learned that the problem of abortion law was a migrant problem as well, as the migrant people were particularly affected by it because of visa restrictions. So it is important to understand that all of the perspectives of the different dimensions of exploitation are important to be taken in when we're building collective power and effective political power, because structural mechanisms of social exclusion and economic exclusion affect us in a very particular way, and that's why it's important for us to have an agency on that. So getting involved with those groups is something that we act on as well. So we also got involved with Take Back the City and a little bit before that with Dublin Central Housing Action, with the other housing groups from the Irish Housing Network. In Summerhill we had like a situation where 120 people were evicted without notice, and we were involved in these campaigns. Most of those people were migrants, and of course a huge part of those migrants were Brazilian migrants. So this is how have another important aspect as well, which is the fact that it gives the Brazilian community, the Brazilian people, slowly a sense of belonging and an idea that we don't have to take everything that is imposed on us. We have the ability and the power to build collectively a power to fight back. Recently we had an eviction as well that we worked with CATU. Some CATU members from the Brazilian community were being evicted in Blackrock, and fighting and winning this gave that people a sense that they were not alone. They were able to articulate themselves for a victory. So that is important to give us this sense of the power to build this collective, organize collectively and fight back then.
Thanks very much for that, Rodrigo. Our second speaker is Gloria Kensho. Gloria is a former president of the African Students Association of Ireland, and having completed her studies is soon to be a trainee solicitor. Gloria, in our conversations prior to this, wants to make it very clear to me that she was not a activist per se, and that she had been kind of thrown into this thing following the tragic passing of her brother. Gloria has spoken very strongly on bias by police and the role that class plays in oppression and racism in Ireland, and we're very happy to have her join us tonight. So Gloria, if you want to say a few words.
Thank you. So, like previously said, I'm not an activist in any way. I'm not an expert in any of these things, but what it is I have been thrown here just due to unfortunate circumstances and my experience before and up to the fact is why I'm kind of here to speak. I have seen that there is a huge class issue in Ireland, particularly where I live. I'm from Blanchardstown, Dublin 15 area in particular, and especially in the role of policing in my community. I am a black girl, I'm from Nigeria, but I've lived here most of my life. I came here when I was 4, and of course we are one of the first generations of black African people to come to Ireland. So of course we do see a lot of ignorance and a lot of lack of knowledge, but growing up and being a teenager, going to secondary school, going into college, university, working, I've seen that there is more of a class issue in where you're based, and again, like I said, and particularly how we're policed, and not just the black girls, but particularly the black African boys. My friends and their experiences with how they're policed, how they're stopped and searched is profiling, stereotypical profiling. I've been in the passenger seat at times where my friend is stopped and is questioned as to, the first question is, this is a nice car, where is this car from, who owns it? My friend in that instance is a civil engineer. You know, he works, he makes money, he can buy a nice car, but that is the type of profiling that is experienced. They search the car, and it's rampant. It's something that we see constantly. Police sometimes, you know, and I'm not here to say that everyone is bad and you know, all the police forces are bad, but unfortunately there are bad apples, and unfortunately in this type of organization you can't afford to have bad apples, because if you go to a hospital and they said, oh well, 90% of our doctors are good and qualified, but there is, let's say, 10 to 5% that aren't the best and, you know, might mess up your medication, that's not acceptable. Likewise, that shouldn't be what we accept in our communities as well. There should be proper training for people who are going to be integrating and interacting with minorities, and especially if they're not from the community, if they're not from Blanchardstown and they don't know the people and they don't know the community that they're policing, there should be some training, there should be some sort of experience so they know how to handle certain situations. Before the unfortunate incident that occurred, I would say maybe I am privileged in that respect that I haven't been thrown in and seen so much racism. I've never been called the N-word or anything like that, and maybe that's just me being lucky in that regard. But then after this incident, it was almost like the scales or whatever fell off of my eyes, and I've just been witness to the amount of racism that actually does exist, within my community and also outside it. People where I once called my home and my community and where I belonged, I now kind of feel like an outsider. You know, having to leave my home, having to do all these things that I would never had to have done before. Being a minority now is just more highlighted to me that I'm actually a minority. I'm actually a black girl. I'm not a white Irish girl. I've always identified as an Irish Nigerian girl because this is, like I said, this is my home. But after this incident, I've just realized that although race does play a factor, the class that you belong in, the area that you live in, also plays a huge factor in how people view you and how people interact with you as well.
Okay, thanks very much for that, Gloria. Our third speaker is Councillor Kieran Perry. Kieran has been an elected independent representative in Dublin City Council for over 10 years. He has been involved in a number of campaigns, most notably in opposing the selling off of public lands to private developers. He has been a strong advocate for workers' rights, and of course his road to politics was preceded by many years of community activism in his area, including anti-fascist and anti-racist organising since he was a teenager. So thanks for coming, Kieran, if you want to have a few words.
Thanks, Ryan, and thanks for the invitation for tonight. The importance of the topic I don't think can be underestimated or overestimated. The role that communities have to play in the fight against racism. We can legislate all we want against hate crime, but in actual fact, it's what your ordinary neighbour, your next door neighbour does that will directly affect you, as Gloria has said. What Gloria said really struck me as in it being a class issue, primarily because the same harassment that you would see with your male friends, we would see that all over Dublin Central, where white working class youths, mainly males, the same thing, that the class bias from the police. You say a couple of bad apples type thing, but like anybody that's been politically active for any number of years or who would have a leftist ideology would recognise that the police, they're not really there just for our benefit, if at all for our benefit. They're there to protect the system that we live under. And unfortunately, even last Friday night, we seen political policing in action. When in my area we have an incident of serious criminality, antisocial behaviour, whatever, we've always difficulty getting any sort of response from the police because I represent the primarily working class area. Yet, with the Devon and strike, with a click of a finger, we have 30 plus Gardaí, including the public order unit, arrive. Phenomenal resources that we could badly do in my area, as I'm sure you could in Blanchardstown, being a similar area. We've seen it during the water tax campaign, when you would have literally tens of guards turn up to break up a blockade or whatever. The same number wouldn't be available when the crimes affect us and our neighbours. So there has to be a recognition that the police primarily protect the system. Unfortunately, they are necessary. Without going off on any sort of tangent, back in the 90s during the anti-drugs movement, we policed our own communities, but that's unique. Like that's in itself is worth investigating, is worth expanding on, but obviously not here tonight. The very fact that the problem we have in working class communities is, by definition, there's scarce resources, be it for jobs, housing, whatever. Everything is scarce resources. So what you have is an immediate competition between the locals, be it like prior to the race issue becoming an issue, it would be unmarried mothers
or would it be some other bogey person created by the system for people to fight amongst themselves, as opposed to what you said, Rodrigo, where the system is at fault, the ideological system is at fault. The housing situation is purpose. It's not a mistake. It's a purpose that they have a lack of housing for people. That because the lobbyists who control government, it increases their wealth, be it the developers, be it the auctioneers, be it the renters, be it the foreign investment funds. It increases their wealth, and they're the ones that control society. So it's not an accident that we've arrived where we are. And then what we find is, in the case of housing, we're led to believe that newly arrived refugees or immigrants into the country are automatically assigned housing. You know, it just doesn't happen. Like in my area, for instance, there's so many people looking for houses that when a house becomes vacant, when some poor person dies, or they give up their house for whatever reason, they move into a home, the amount of people that contact me before anybody officially will be aware that the house is free is phenomenal. So the people within the communities are watching everything that happens in relation to housing. So it just wouldn't be possible for somebody to sleight a hand to give every person that arrives in from wherever houses. It just wouldn't be possible. But people want the scapegoat because it doesn't make sense that we can't just build enough houses for people. We have the land, we have the builders, we have the money. Like, there's no argument against money. Like, finance at the moment is almost 0% borrowing. So all the ingredients are there. So people can't figure out, why can't we just build the houses? There must be something else going on. And then you have the media, the politicians looking to cover themselves, who start to spread the rumours. It's the unmarried mothers getting free houses. It's the immigrants. It's refugees coming into the country who are getting houses. And people are looking for an easier solution. And something that sticks out like that, they begin to believe out of desperation. And it's the same to do with work. It's the same to do with any of the public services, the scarce resources that we do have that aren't properly invested in this system, that people look around for an easy scapegoat. And the arguments from the right are simplistic and easy to understand. Like, what we have to do is try and explain ideologically why the police don't protect working class communities, why the police protect the system. Like, that's a much bigger, difficult argument to make even to our neighbours, rather than saying, no, the police do a great job. It's the antisocial elements or the people outside who cause all the problem. So our arguments are much more complex to try and explain, where those of the right can be easily absorbed by people who are looking, again, for a scapegoat out of desperation.
Thanks very much for that, Kieran. And Gloria, you wanted to pick up on something that Kieran said there?
Yeah, I just wanted to bounce off something that Kieran said in terms of community. I think sometimes people don't realise the power that a community can actually have on any particular organisation. And I think I've seen something recently. My family did a press conference, and there was loads of reporters, and there was cameras and so forth. And then there was one reporter that was badgering and like asking certain questions and almost trying to intimidate my dad. And the rest were quiet. And it just kind of painted a picture. And sometimes in the community, the bad is always the one that's highlighted. So it's always one person being the loudest, and then the rest, even though they know it's bad, they're quiet. And then after that press conference, we had a lot of reporters come up and say that was terrible what he did. He shouldn't have done this and blah, 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 blah. But then it just speaks to the fact that, if maybe one other person had said, stop doing what you're doing, stop badgering, stop trying to attack, stop trying to do this thing that you're doing, it would have probably derailed that whole press conference. And sometimes when a community comes together and says, we know that this is wrong, because not everybody is racist, not everybody is biased and whatever. It's only a small minority, but unfortunately that small minority is always the loudest. Empty barrels make the most noise. And people who know that it's wrong sometimes are just quiet and just sometimes sit back. I think there was a time, I don't know if you guys remember, the Grafton Street Flowers, the flower sellers. There was a time where a big corporation had made like a complaint and said, oh, they were causing an eyesore or so forth. And then it wasn't until they received a lot of backlash from the rest of the wider community, they retracted. You see, a big corporation versus community, when communities stand and say this is wrong, all it takes is one other person or two other people to say what you're doing is wrong. And then you will see how much everybody else can back down, and then everyone else will strive to come forward and do the right thing. At the end of the day, when the incident happened with my brother, yes, we had people from my community, the black Irish people, coming up and talking and doing this, but we can't do it all alone. We need everybody else, people who do know that it's wrong, people who are on the side of good and justice to also come up and speak. This is wrong. It's not. I'm not asking you to scream to the stages, but just in little aspects where you see something happening that is wrong, all you have to do is correct it. All you have to do is speak up. You can't just let that one person who represents a very, very small minority speak for the rest, because that's sometimes what can happen.
Can I just say one thing there, Gloria? You really hit an extremely important point. I've seen some of the coverage after your brother's unfortunate death, and it was absolutely shocking, the amount, the venom, the bitterness and the racism. But that's organised by a very small number of people on a toxic social media platform. The vast majority of people don't engage in that, but those who are, again, to use the word ideologically minded, they used that situation to promote their own view, and they got huge, widespread publicity out of it. But again, as you've said, they're a small minority. The vast majority of people wouldn't be of that opinion, and that incident to me highlighted how powerful those loud voices can be if they're not tackled. And it's a really important point you make. It's up to every single one of us who aren't directly affected by whatever issue to stand up and support those that are.
Exactly.
Yeah, and just on that, it's good. It was a good thing that Gloria said there. The empty vessels make the loud noises. It's correct. Did you see? You said in your opening remarks that you kind of saw a racism that you hadn't seen before in the incident. But we did see, and we saw all the venomous and hate in the comment section online and all that kind of stuff. But there was also a kind of support and solidarity given in that community, and it kind of very quickly the narrative changed from the false information that was given used as a weapon by the far right and those kind of characters. And it was kind of, within a few days, it was kind of challenged, and the narrative kind of changed, and there was more kind of groups and speaking out against and in solidarity with you. Did you know? Could you speak a bit on that?
Yeah.
Or was there still lots of stuff in the area of the negative kind of racist nature?
So of course, in the immediate aftermath of my brother's incident, like you said, venom and just things that I never even thought could possibly happened. Threats, I've never received threats, everything. And then in a couple of days where the group started to form and challenged it, and then the truth came out, and then you saw a complete change in narrative. Again, you started seeing more support, you started seeing people speaking out, you started seeing all of those type of things. And it's very, very, very important that is actually shown, because I know a vast majority of people don't believe these venomous things that was putting out, and don't believe all the lies and don't believe all of these things. But it's kind of, if you don't say it or if you don't spread the good that is seen, you almost start to question yourself. I remember even sitting in the room with my friend, I think it was the second day that he had passed, and I was questioning myself, and I'm like, am I missing something here? Am I not able to see what has happened? Is what's going on, what I'm seeing online and being shown to me, is this correct? Did he do this? Did this actually happen? Started to question myself until, the group started to form, and I've seen a huge amount of support. And I do want to hammer on that point that I have seen an enormous amount of support given to me and my family by people out there as well. So it's not just all this, he was this, and all the hate and all of that. I've received love. We've even received a book of condolences as well, written by another organization. It has been amazing, and it just shows what can be done when just even 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 people come together and say, do you know what, let's do something about this.
That's great, thanks for that. And Rodrigo, when you're listening to what's been said there, we've focused a lot on Blanchardstown so far, and perhaps we'll move away from the Blanchardstown aspect. When you're listening to that, can you relate to some of the stuff, particularly the media stuff? I suppose as a Brazilian and as an organiser of Brazilian people, can you see similarities there?
What I think when I hear that is that something that Kieran said about there will always be a scapegoat. So that's a system that relies on those kind of structural differences and exclusion. So those narratives of the media and how well people incorporate some common sense narratives into their lives, and it's very hard to have a critical thinking about situations like this sometimes for people who are probably just living their everyday lives. And so with the Brazilian community, for example, the episodes of violence with the Deliveroo riders, we see a lot of punitivist narratives emerging from the violence that they suffer, and they want that something has to be done against those who afflict violence on them. And it's something that is a job of really showing the structural exploitations that happen, like we know the Deliveroo and these type of jobs that are very it's the modern face of neoliberalism. People working without any working rights, without any support from the companies, and then we have also like the structural mechanism of the visa status of people. They're not allowed to work and deliver as delivery riders if they are stamped 2, and so they have to have a stamp 4 visa to work on that. People that are facing problems as well as like left out of the society, of the marginalized because they have no jobs. They will think that those people are stealing their jobs, and then we have exploited people fighting each other. And it's something that we have to go in and sometimes try to organize a space for people to kind of like have a different perspective. So that was a job that we tried to do at the beginning, like, you know, talking with the Deliveroo people and kind of like bringing this perspective. Okay, no, we're here. We know it's a dramatic situation, but we have to know who we're fighting against. We're not fighting against working class people. We're fighting against the system that imposed those exclusions and those situations on us. I see that, and I see that it's good when the people affected start getting learning about with their experience and organizing to build a narrative, a critical narrative, and fight back. I think a lot of Gloria is saying there is has a lot to do with that. You know, when 5 people come together to challenge those narratives, we gain agency, and we can put forward our experience, so to be taken in and fight back.
I was wondering if you could speak about what you hear on the doors, and what are the kind of narratives that people are falling into who are engaging in kind of racist rhetoric or whatever, and what we need to do to kind of better inform the people who are probably engaging in this kind of the stuff against delivery drivers, but beyond that, and are falling victim to the racial kind of tension narrative that has been portrayed by reactionary forces.
Just to deal with the Deliveroo issue first, there's a couple of strands there. One is that it's similar to back in the 80s when up in the south side there would have been a lot of gay clubs up there, and a lot of the local young fellas
used to rob the gay fellas coming out of the clubs, not because they were anti-gay, they may or may not have been, simply because they wouldn't report it, they wouldn't go to the police, they were an easy touch, they always had a few bob, okay? Similarly, the Deliveroo drivers, because of the precarious nature of the work, most likely won't go to the police. There's a good chance they won't. Also, they're not from the area, so those mugging them will probably get away with it, maybe get a valuable bike out of it as well. So there's that, I will say, criminal economic aspect to it. So it's not purely race. It's not purely race in that sense. A lot of the people involved in the incidents with Deliveroo, these are people who are intimidating and oppressing their own communities. Like in some of the incidents that made headlines, the people directly involved in that are people who abuse, intimidate their own communities and their own neighbours. So it's not because they specifically dislike Deliveroo drivers or Brazilians. They're just scum. Like they abuse their own communities. They're parasitic members of the community. That has to be recognised. Like they would turn on me as quick as they turn on yourselves. The issues that arise in community, again, I sort of did mention it, the search for a scapegoat to explain why the powers that be simply can't provide a decent bus service, can't provide work, can't provide housing. They're the issues that arise constantly, and as I said, the rhetoric of the far right is simplistic, and if people are clutching at straws, it's easier to believe than having to listen to me on a doorstep for 15-20 minutes trying to explain the ills of capitalism or something, you know what I mean? So that's the issue. Now, a problem for ourselves is like the whole liberal view of, say, open borders, like the ridiculousness of that argument, like, you know, oh no, everyone's welcome, come on out, everybody come in. Like, that liberal view makes it extremely difficult, because people assume that if you're on the left, that you're of that same mindset, that type of thing, or that increased immigration doesn't affect wages. Like, we may not like to admit to it, it does. It's simple. It does affect it. Who's at fault? The employer, who's exploiting the person that they're not paying the minimum wage to, or the people possibly using the service. But it does affect people, and people's terms and conditions of employment, people's ability to house themselves, whatever. There are issues there that have that cause genuine concern, and if we don't address those from a left perspective, the right certainly will. And what the right do is, as I keep saying, sell a simpler message. And once they're getting their simpler message out, and as we've said about the toxicity of social media, like, it's just, you know, you don't even have to stand up publicly and make these claims and, like, you know, get challenged. You know, if somebody else calls a public meeting tomorrow and starts saying that the Deliveroo drivers are taking our jobs or whatever, like, you know, we'd go along and challenge it. You'd argue the points, you know, but that's not happening. It's online. It's sent out. It's organised. As Aaron says, there's groups specifically set up, like the rumours about your brother that came out like that, you know, overnight, like that had to be organised. And as people have always said about publicity, people tend to read the first thing that comes to mind, the headlines, and when the headlines are proven to be incorrect, people don't always remember the correction. And that's how a lot of the media over the years have got away with propaganda against our class, against ordinary people, by putting out some story that's eventually disproven, but that doesn't get the headlines. Disproving it doesn't get the headlines.
Thanks for that, Kieran. I wanted to move, or does anyone want to say something?
Try to say something about, for example, what you said on the fact that the people they rent, they kind of take other people's license to work on Deliveroo because of the restrictions in their visa status, and that's something that make them actually more vulnerable in the sense that they're not protected by insurance and all that. The primary narrative that comes up when people find out it is that, oh, okay, so they're doing something wrong, and it has to be taken into consideration that these people are trying to survive, to try to make a living and work. So I think by challenging those narratives and this very material reality of people, we know we have to fight for our lives, we need to survive, we need to work. And it's a way of showing people that, well, these people are actually not doing something wrong. They are the system should be different. Like the visas should be different. These people should be allowed to work and get a living wage from their jobs. And the reality is that stamp 2 visas don't allow people to work and get a living wage. So this is thing that we have to bring about a lot. And I kind of think this idea of addressing the issue of migration or migrants affecting wages can be a little bit counterproductive in this sense, because we could focus more on the idea that, well, we have people who are for some reason migrating as Irish people did in the past, and we know that's because there is a very unfair and exploitative system that makes people for X number of reasons have to do something about their lives, and we need to fight for everybody to have a way of taking care of their lives, you know. I see that we kind of fall in the trap that neoliberal politics put us, because one of the ways of avoiding us from or stop us from organizing the structural and material realities that we live in our everyday life. So I'm from a big town in Brazil, Rio de Janeiro. It would take me 4 hours a day in the public transport to get from and to work. So that's a blockage for me to do anything else in my life, because I have to work and get home, and that's it. So those structures, they affect the working class, the Irish people in the working class suburbs or communities. And these people will get inwards a lot, look for the individual situations and try to improve it. So that's just a reality everywhere. So it's very hard to look out, to look for the people around you facing different problems, and also at the end join all those struggles and fight together. That would make us stronger, you know.
Absolutely, thanks very much for that. I was going to ask perhaps Kieran to speak about the effect that the housing crisis had in communities that you've been working in.
I think housing is probably the biggest issue facing people at this moment in time. And like, I'd be an advocate for public housing, which would be obviously state provided housing for those that want it. Those that choose not to want it, that's their own business. Like, you know, they can self-finance what they want, but like similar to the Vienna model, which incidentally is, you know, 100 years old because of the Socialist revolution in Vienna at the time, you know, and they set the tone for the most progressive housing policy in Europe 100 years later, which is, you know, something that isn't always acknowledged when people point to Vienna as, you know, one of the solutions. But again, that's the housing model that I would be campaigning for. And what we argue is not alone does that provide housing, proper, sustainable, security of tenure, good quality homes for people who want to live in public housing, it also automatically deflates the purchase market for housing. So therefore, if somebody wants to buy their own, by providing proper public housing, we've deflated the market and decreased the prices. The same for rents. If people choose to rent in the private sector, or if the public provision of housing isn't sufficient at the time, by having a decent volume of public housing, we automatically deflate rents as well. So right across, it's not just people on the housing list. Sometimes people think when we talk about public housing, we're talking about people on the housing list. We're not talking about people only on the housing list. We're talking about people who are on the housing list. We're talking about people who don't meet the criteria for the housing list. We're talking about people who don't want to buy, make a choice not to buy, or people who can't afford but would happily live in good quality public housing, like in the likes of Vienna. So that's what we're looking for. Then to confirm that the housing crisis or emergency isn't by accident, that it's an actually artificial market, like the O'Devney Gardens example, like just it's astounding even for a cynic like myself. Like what they actually did, they gave away, I think it was 12 or 14 hectares of prime public land, almost in the middle of the city, beside the Phoenix Park, beside the Lewis Line. Huge amenities. There's, with the potential for 800 to 1,000 houses, homes. And they gave that land to a private developer to develop, and the private developer will sell back to, now just to confirm, they gave the land away. They didn't sell the land. People say that we've sold the public land to the, we didn't. We gave them the land for free. And what the developer will give back to us, nothing actually, he won't give us. He'll sell us back at cost plus 5%, 30% of those units. That's the deal that we've made. Prime public land that would house 1,000 people, 1,000 families. And like that to me is an example of how ideologically corrupt this system is. And because people are forced to abide by the system, they keep their heads down. Like we spend billions on HAP and RAS and the other rent support schemes, billions on them, which if they were invested would build public homes for perpetuity, forever.
CATU has got mentioned a few times there, and I know that you're part of CATU, Rodrigo. And could you maybe talk a bit about, Kieran talked about the use of land, and you know, when you hand it over to the privateers, they sell it back, and for kind of inflated prices, or when it goes to the rental market, there's no kind of ending to the rates going up. And we know that, particularly in Dublin, the people who are at the sharp end of that a lot of the time are migrant workers, and you spoke about Take Back the City and the effect that in the click of a finger there were 60 Brazilian people thrown out of a house one night and they were homeless. Could you maybe talk to us about the effect that the housing kind of crisis had on migrant workers, and perhaps talk a bit about the organising that went on with Take Back the City or more recently with CATU and kind of how we're coming together in communities to kind of push back against the housing crisis?
Yeah, as a migrant working, organising with local groups around housing, what I see, from my perspective, what I see as a huge challenge is the fact that the migrants, the Brazilians, we sometimes don't really believe or really feel that we will have the support, so we just don't want to take the risks. It's from fear of their deportation or any criminal conviction or we're very fearful because we don't know the law very well. We don't know the environment here as like it's social environment. So most of the time, Brazilian people just take and they don't want to fight back. They just want to say, okay, no, that's fine. We just move. So it's a very easy target for the landlords. So when we try to organize, even me being present, speaking Portuguese, trying to say, okay, this group is behind us, they will support us, it's very hard for people to build the confidence and really take the fight. So we Take Back the City in Summerhill. It's 120 people were evicted at once, and most of them were migrants, and most of those migrants were Brazilians. It was 16 houses, at once. And nobody stayed, the Brazilians didn't have the courage, or they didn't have the confidence to really stay there because it was very dangerous. They could, the situation meant that they could suffer consequences on the visa perspective and the legality of their permanence here. So,
sorry, Rodrigo, could you actually tell us what are the kind of conditions that the migrants that you come to, similar to those guys? Because when people hear 120 people out of a row of houses, there's like 8 people to a room now. So maybe if you could talk a little bit about what are the conditions that migrant workers are living under in
overcrowding conditions and like no maintenance. So the houses are really bad, and then people are paying a huge amount of money for like a bunk bed, for a place in a room with like maybe 4 more people. So, and it's always people want to stay close to their jobs, and they had to work in different jobs to make a living. So it's very hard to be far out of the city. So it's very hard, and then the lack of maintenance makes it legal for the landlord to come in and just say, okay, I need to out because I need to fix the house. So we see that a lot of landlords do that like with the intention to down the road just evicted people with some understandable reason. So it's the main challenge, I think, is with these organizing is to build this confidence, give people agency on their fights, and that from the inside perspective, we also need the local groups to take all those narratives and those lived experiences in when organizing their campaigns and all, so we can be part of it. But having these agencies is important because of the sense of belonging that people start getting. So the latest experience with Kato in Blackrock was an example of that, because we saw it on the people involved, that they stayed and they did it, they fought, they had the support of the community or the union, but they actually came up with the whole plan. They actually came up with the, what they wanted, or their demands and how they wanted to work on. And now we see that they are much more confident to talk to others about these, and kind of that goes slowly building some very important movement. So
that's great. Thanks for that. And Gloria, we know you're not a housing activist, right? So don't go at it. But I know you're listening to here, and I know you're from Blanchardstown, and we know that Blanchardstown is quite a diverse area. People from various different backgrounds and stuff, but it's also a place fraught with overcrowding and kind of lack of housing and deprivation. So within your community, do you have any views on what you're hearing about housing there? Or?
Yeah, just in terms of what I'm hearing here, I did, when I was doing my master's, I actually did a little research project on the imbalance of power of landlords and tenants, and, with the HAP and all the billions of money that's actually invested in. And I also used to beg the question at the back of my mind, if we have all the money to have, temporary accommodation and, give rent relief and so forth, why can't we just build more houses and so forth? So what you said about, how sometimes it might be intentional, I think, maybe that's the answer to the question. But in terms of housing and what I've seen in my area, I haven't seen, my eyes haven't actually been open. I probably haven't been paying a lot of attention to it. But I do know, even just being knowing families that have been on the housing list for close to 16 to 17 years, and then effectively are just kind of taking off and saying, you know what, find your way, because they've had kids when they went on the housing link who were young, and then unfortunately these kids have grown up, gotten jobs, and are starting to work and just making just a little bit over the threshold. It's not enough to get a mortgage. It's not enough to, buy a house outright, and then unfortunately it's not enough to be on, you're making too much to be on the housing list. And then what happens to those group of people? They're just kind of left there to fend themselves after waiting for over 10 years, 12, 15 years, and these people have grown up, gotten jobs. They don't make enough to get a mortgage, but they make too much to be on the list.
Yes,
And
yeah.
of course, I know the government will have tried to bring out issues, you know, with the rent control zones, and, you know, they've brought out legislation about short-term letting and so forth. But unfortunately, there's loopholes in these legislation. Like a landlord can't just evict you. They're not allowed to do that. And they can't just raise rents. But unless they make an alteration or they declare that the property is for a relative or so forth, they're allowed to just, you know, say on your horse and off you go. But you also beg these questions of, like, these landlords, do they have a choice? They also have to pay a mortgage as well. The price of housing, because there's not that many, it just increases, supply and demand. It increases the prices, puts sometimes landlords in an awkward positions, because sometimes landlords don't want to evict families. These families have been there for years, but then the mortgage is too much for them. They can't afford it. They're in arrears. The legislation says you're not allowed to just increase prices unless you make a alteration or you declare that the house is for a relative. And then sometimes they use this, and then these people have to just go off and find their own and so forth. The private housing market is people who are on the housing list or don't make enough income shouldn't have to partake in the private market because it's out of their remit. They can't afford it, but they have no other choice. And then there is I know there is a relief of, like, you know, the HAP and so forth, but sometimes it isn't enough, especially when you have a family and you need to provide. So fortunately, even if that's just kind of my remit, then I've seen a little bit about it in college students as well, in terms of the housing prices that they have to pay. I was a little bit privileged, and when I did my undergrad, I lived from home, but then when I did my master's, I went to Galway, and I saw rent prices, and I thought it was just an issue in Dublin, but the rent prices are massive, and sometimes college students aren't protected by that legislation. So landlords can't charge you what they want when you say, I am a college student, which is ironic because we're the ones with no money. So yeah, those are just kind of the issues that I've seen in myself, and I know it's not as, you know, detailed and so forth, but that's just kind of my experience as well.
Thanks very much. Okay, thanks very much for that, Gloria. I think we're going over at the time now, so I think we'll leave it at that. I think we've had a very good discussion, and as was mentioned by Gloria earlier on, we'll find it very difficult, almost impossible, to figure out the ills of society if you're fighting alone. And I think what we try to do with the James Connolly Festival is give a space to kind of invite discussion among people who perhaps haven't got enough time or wouldn't ordinarily sit down in the same room together and kind of discuss the issues and find the common areas of struggle and develop our understanding or analysis and move towards a way of creating a better world. So I hope that the audience have enjoyed the conversation and perhaps have taken something from it. And I hope you'll join us for the events that will continue throughout the week and will be on the same platforms as you're watching this debate. So thanks very much for joining us, and thanks very much to the guests for coming with us today.